In the U.S., starting to really push on is providing that remote peering service in the U.S. But yeah, to me it seems like an obvious thing that we should have been doing years ago.
Thanks, Bill. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Tinka. I'm with SEACOM. Some of you might know who we are. Some of you that don't, we are a submarine cable operator primarily in East Africa. And apologies up front if this presentation might seem like a bit of a SEACOM plug, but I'm trying to really give you a sense of where the industry is on our side of the world and what SEACOM are trying to do to get us to enjoy more and more peering. The presentation is brief. We'll basically look at the evolution of peering in Africa. We'll look at the continuing need for interregional connectivity and also what SEACOM are doing to this end. Excuse me. So, just a little history for those who might be a bit new to the area. Peering in Africa is relatively new for all intents and purposes. In the past, what we had was facilities that are provided free of charge, either by a university or by the government, i.e. there's no data center facilities and you need some place that won't cost you much money and is relatively safe, relatively cool, relatively stable. We then obviously had a lot of inexperience in terms of how we run our networks. Many of us, as many as little as 10 years ago, had no experience with BGP, and much of the time was spent discussing BGP. We actually didn't know much about what it did. When that all got sorted out, we managed to find a couple of donors to get us some switches and a bit of supporting infrastructure to deploy the exchange points. And as of today, based on information published with PCH and with NSRC, we expect that we have about 32 known exchange points in Africa, spread across all regions, including some bits in North Africa as well. Okay? So we've come a relatively long way in a short space of time, but really we are still relatively young in terms of peering. But also, as little as 5 years ago, we still wanted a little bit more traffic on the exchange points. Naively so. We expected that I'd be able to run some kind of connectivity between the Kenya exchange point, for example, and the one in Zambia. The only problem was, obviously, at the time, that we didn't have great connectivity. And even though there were lots of attempts to provide that connectivity with what we had then, which was satellite, high latency, and so forth, those were noble attempts that did not go anywhere. But we still tried nonetheless. At the same time, as much as we did not understand BGP back in 2000, we also did not understand the economics of trying to interconnect different countries or different networks within different countries. Having said that, as much as that interconnectivity did not take place, we enjoyed growth in traffic when all sorts of exchange points, all sorts of CDNs and root name servers and caches and so forth then came into Africa. So that's how traffic began to grow, primarily, as you'd see, in South Africa, in Kenya, and also in a few other places. But obviously the same question lingers, and this is partly why we're here today again. We still want to provide interconnectivity between the various African countries. And there is a lot more fiber now between the African countries. It is either on the ground, terrestrial, or it is on the marine side. The marine side provided by folks like Easy, by folks like Teams, by folks like SEACOM, WAX, and so forth. And on the marine side by private entrepreneurs who are deploying fiber within their own countries and between borders. Yet, as you all see, we still heavily peer between Europe. A lot of our traffic still gets exchanged within Europe. And you would also have noticed that some of the players here are happy to peer with you in Europe, even if they are African operators. It's the way it is, and for various reasons. The concerns about how we extend connectivity between the regions, between the countries in Africa, obviously the economics still play a big issue. Even if we have a lot of options now to get between countries, why is it still not yet happening? Or if it's happening, why is it not yet happening economically? Okay. Political issues regarding cross-border interconnectivity, heavy subject which has been discussed at various AFPIF meetings, is how the governments get together to facilitate cross-border connectivity. Regulatory issues that might impede or might accelerate these kinds of initiatives are also things that need to be considered. And the issue obviously with this is it's unique to almost every different country or almost every different economic region in Africa. Providers also are not stepping up, and it's interesting that Bill has touched on remote peering now, but up until now there's been a sort of reluctance among the providers who are able to offer this kind of inter-regional connectivity, and we are hoping that this begins to change as more of the fiber within Africa starts to get used. So as SEACOM, what are we doing to facilitate interconnectivity between the countries, between the regions? On top of the marine network that we operate, as some of you might know, we also run an IP backbone, okay, for regular IP transit, as well as an MPLS backbone, like Bill alluded to carry all sorts of services, one of which is Ethernet, which is how exchange points live.